why the Battle for Azeroth was bad. It sounds like a negative title, but Mad Season does a good job of keeping things constructive and not just saying this sucks, I'm gonna cry about it, but saying these are the reasons this was bad and this is what we could potentially learn from it, you know. And so it's not like that negative. Positive vibes. Why the Battle for Azeroth was bad. Let's go. Yo, Taku, thanks for the gifted sub, or welcome in from Byte. There we go, man.
Hey guys, what's up? Mad Season here,
hey,
back
Mad
with
Season.
Another video for you. Welcome back to another episode of Why It Was, a series where we cover the best and the worst and explain just why they have earned those labels today. And today, we will be diving into the World of Warcraft 7th expansion, the Battle for Azeroth.
Okay.
Similar to my previous episode, the Warlords of Draenor, BFA today is used much like a punching bag by both fans and haters alike, but the criticisms are usually summed up to BFA bad. So today I wanted to set the record straight and explain just why the Battle for Azeroth was bad.
So once again, he doesn't just say BFA bad, this sucks. It's like, okay, let's take a little more of like an analytical approach and see why it was actually bad. Now, I did this yesterday and why Warlords was bad, and I gave you guys my thought process as why it was my least favorite expansion, and you can watch that video if you want. But for BFA, I might be on copium, and I played a lot of PvP, and I actually did a little bit of PvE as well this expansion. I did some Mythic Plus for a bit, and I don't hate me for this, guys. I actually somewhat enjoyed Battle for Azeroth. All right, I don't think BFA was that bad. I had fun. I played the whole expansion. Now I am biased. I played with Peekaboo and Born Good, and we were just, I don't know how to say this. We're doing very well. We'll say that. And we played Mythic Plus, and we also did very well. And sometimes it's just like you get a little bias from stuff like that, right? So maybe mages were just OP is what I'm trying to say. But they were OP in every other expansion. I don't know. I liked Battle for Azeroth. I had fun in the M+. I had fun in the arenas. And there was things I did not like about Battle for Azeroth. One of the things I didn't like was the loot system for PvP. It was completely RNG. You just had to cross your fingers every week on the loot chest. That sucked. And then the what was it called? Corruption gear was interesting. But Reaping Souls, if you guys remember, Reaping was like super fun to play with in PvP. And the gameplay was actually not bad. I played with Wreckful in this expansion. We played RMP up to like 3K, and that was fun. I played Double Mage with Mitch, and that was fun. Maybe I just have good memories from BFA. Playing with Wreckful, playing with Mitch, playing with Peekaboo. I don't know. Anyway, I somewhat enjoyed it. So I'm curious. I know a lot of people didn't. I'm curious what this video has to say.
Before we get into it, I would like to thank the sponsor for today's video, Exit Lag. What it does is it optimizes your game's performance and connect.
I don't use Exit Lag right now, but I have in the past. And quick story time. In college, my internet connection was really bad, and I used Exit Lag or something very similar to it at the time. I don't know if that exists anymore. Ping Zapper or Exit Lag, but essentially it reroutes the packets. And it fixed my internet in college. So for whatever reason in college, there's like so many freshmen like in the dorms, my connection sucked. But I used a system like this that rerouted the packets, and it fixed it. Like I could actually play. I couldn't play without it. And I was so happy that I could play World of Warcraft, because I basically, without it, I had to quit. Like it was just unbearably laggy. Like 300 or 400 ms or more or whatever, and then with it just fixed everything. So anyway, if you're in a college dorm or you're having lag, I do think either Exit Lag or something like it is worth trying, because it owned for me.
Connection. For example, here's a before with classic World of Warcraft. As you can see, my ping is in the 60s. It's really simple to use. You just go to their website, make an account, download the client, and just like that, you have AI route optimization, dynamic stabilizers, and diagnostic centers. There are a ton of games compatible that you can find with a search. So I just look for World of Warcraft here, and with a couple of clicks, I'm all set up. From there, you just relaunch the game, and as you can see, it cut it all the way down to 30, which is huge, especially if you're doing something like PvP. So try out Exit Leg and see if it works for you, and be sure to use my promo code for a discount. And if you have any friends, they also have some duo and squad packages for discounts for multiple people. And also be sure to check out their birthday offer that's going on, where you can get 12 months for only paying 6, and take the time to up your game. But anyways, back to the video. The year is 2017, and the World of Warcraft is riding a recent high from a pretty favored expansion, Legion. After the Warlords of Draenor debacle, think of it as Blizzard's midlife crisis, complete with a mullet and a sports car that they could not afford. It was quite the redemption arc. Mythic Plus Dungeons revolutionized 5-man content, giving it a viable endgame, and World Quests replaced the quite archaic daily hub grind, providing more variety while at the same time getting people out into the world to make it seem more lively and sprawling. An issue that you may know the Warlords of Draenor suffered from. Artifact weapons provided another form of character progression, along with a lot of class identity, something else that was also a large focus of the expansion. And as for the raids, they're as good as ever. It was far from perfect, but Legion showed that World of Warcraft still had life in it. The community was buzzing, the game felt alive, and so the expectations were quite high for its successor, which was revealed on November 3rd, 2017. The crowd is hyped, the lights dim, and Blizzard drops a bombshell. The next
I was so excited when I was here in person for BFA for the main reason that Battle for Azeroth was the first expansion name in the title that had something to do with PvP, right? Battle for Azeroth. It's Horde versus Alliance again. And we are battling for Azeroth. I was like, okay, great. This is like the first PvP expansion. And let's be honest, guys, the BFA trailer is probably my favorite trailer of all time. He might show it in this video, but I'm just gonna pull it up real quick. This part right here. Nerd chills every time, and I've seen this like probably 30 times. Every single time, bro. And there, like when I first saw that in person on the big screen like this, it was just like, dude, the crowd went wild, man. Holy crap.
Is the Battle for Azeroth.
Still my favorite trailer to this day.
It was what initially made the Warcraft franchise great. The Alliance versus the Horde.
Right, yeah.
Dialed up to 11. Sylvanas had torched Teldrassil, the war drums were thundering, and we were shipped off to 2 new continents, Kultiris and Zandalar, dripping with pirate swagger and troll mysticism. Legion's artifact weapons were retiring, and they were replaced by this shiny new Azerite armor system, which was hyped as a customization dream. Similar to the artifact weapons, players would collect a currency called Azerite to level up an amulet, and the level of the amulet would then unlock traits attached to
PTSD
pieces
here.
of armor for your head, chest, and shoulder slots. The traits themselves were advertised as being highly customizable and unique and variable, and combined with the talent and spec choices, no 2 players would play the same. There were also war fronts, where you would team up with a raid of fellow...
So that's just something you shouldn't claim in modern gaming, because someone is going to find the best spec and everyone else is going to copy them, no matter how you slice it. The old days of every player playing different was just because players sucked. It was because players didn't have all the information because the internet wasn't at scale yet. The only reason people played different builds back in the day is because the info wasn't out there. Now it is. So like that's just a thing of the past. You can't even make the promise like everyone's gonna have their own unique builds and play styles. Like no, we're past that, man. That's just not happening anymore. There's no way.
Players capture territory, managed resources, and defeated bosses in this nostalgia trip that paid tribute to the original RTS. And there were also island expeditions, which were small group-based activities
I forgot
where
about these.
adventurers were dropped on a random island with random enemies, random events, and rewards. The goal was to scramble to obtain as much Azerite as possible before an enemy team did. This currency would be central to the expansion.
I thought these were going to be sick.
It was used to
And then
level
they
up your
weren't.
Azerite armor, and the expeditions themselves banked heavily on dynamic gameplay and variety through its random nature. All of this was tied together with the faction conflict that had made the series special. After several expansions where the Horde and Alliance band together to defeat a great evil, they seemed to get back to their roots with this immense war serving as the beating heart of the expansion. So after Draenor's flop and Legion's glow up, the battle for Azeroth seemed like a safe bet. It was a return to its roots by every stretch of the imagination, but at the same time polished with modern bells and whistles, and it was a very much welcomed theme. Similar in a lot of ways to Draenor, for many it wasn't just an expansion, it was a homecoming.
Yeah.
Say what you will about Blizzard, but they've never had an issue in selling expansions. In fact, it almost seems to be an inverse relationship, with some of their worst received critically selling the most. And the battle for Azeroth was no different. Hype-wise, it wasn't quite at the same level as the Warlords of Draenor, I would say. And as for subscriptions, it was hard to tell because the numbers were no longer public at this point. But regardless, there still was a lot of excitement buzzing around it. It officially launched on August 14th, 2018.
I can't wait for BlizzCon next year,
Numbers were
man.
initially great. There were 3.4 million copies sold day one, with subscribers spiking like it was 2008 all over again. And as far as technical issues during the launch, it wasn't too bad. Certainly nowhere near as bad as the Warlords of Draenor. People did the typical stuff. They leveled to the new max, explored the new features, but it wouldn't be long until the cracks started to show, as unfortunately, each of the major features had started to fail one by one, starting with what was easily the most important, the Azerite armor. Artifacts, Azerite armor, and later Torghast legendaries. These are all examples of borrowed power systems. That is, features that are used as character progression to fit the theme of the expansion, and when that expansion is over, they are discarded. This is done, rightfully so, to avoid bloat. If each of these systems were maintained and updated throughout each of these expansions, there would be over a dozen forms of character progression that the players would have to keep up with.
That'd be crazy.
Similar to, say, an old mobile game that's been running for over a decade. They become quite messy, confusing, and much too intimidating for new players to get into.
Right,
So
yeah.
right out of the gate, Blizzard had dug themselves into this hole because they were losing several borrowed power systems that heavily influenced how the classes played. You had not only the artifact weapons from Legion, but also legendaries, those Argus trees that came in patch 7.2, and also tier set bonuses. And so each and every class headed into BFA losing a large chunk of their toolkit, and as a result, they also lost their polish and feel. The reason why Azerite armor existed in the first place was to try to fill in this gap, but unfortunately, for many reasons, it failed. When it was revealed in BlizzCon 2017, it was hyped to the moon as game-changing traits and handcrafted customization. Players would be able to pick their playstyle, teasing, for example, stuff like stand in the fire longer to heal the tank, or boost your mobility.
You might find a power that makes you think twice about using a talent that you'd previously written off. And you will certainly find combinations that reinforce your favorite way to play your character.
But in reality, these traits would unfortunately be very bland. You had things such as proc a bleed, proc a heal, gain X stat for 10 seconds on a crit, or sometimes even just straight up passive stat boosts.
Yep.
They simply weren't as game-changing as advertised,
Yep.
especially compared to the Legion artifacts, which actually had traits that did change how your class played when you got them. Although there was no real choice, since you just eventually got every trait in these artifact weapons, they actually were pretty game-changing. Additionally, another thing they were banking on, which was choice, fell victim to the same problem that the game had faced since its release in 2004 with its old talent trees. It only provides the illusion of choice because there's always a best, and most of the player base did just that. They opened up an Icy Veins guide and picked the best trait. Simple as that. And again, traits that didn't actually alter your gameplay, but were instead pretty bland passive effects and procs that the players didn't even realize they had half the time. Another issue that made it fall short was that, unlike the Legion artifacts, the traits weren't unique to each class, let alone spec. As mentioned, one of the areas that Legion excelled at was class fantasy. There's a big pruning that happened in the transition to give them more identity, and it was something that was complemented quite nicely with the artifacts themselves. It's hard to not feel like a paladin when you're wielding Ashbringer, or an arcane mage when you have a Luneth, but these artifacts and all of their unique spec-based traits were replaced with things like chance to apply a bleed, or plus.
The problem was too that all of these were like the best. I remember for mages, overwhelming power was just so good that you kind of like needed to have it. And it was just, all of these are just like passive background things that didn't actually impact anything at all. So yeah, the whole system just kind of flopped, right? But like Matt Season just said, and like I said 5 minutes ago, it's modern internet culture. Everyone is going to Google the best thing and just do the best thing. The reason that things were different back then is just because we didn't have the internet, right? And I'll keep repeating that until I'm like blue in the face, because I feel like it's just like needs to be said.
X mastery for 10 seconds, and as a result, all of this class fantasy that they had worked so hard to build in Legion just evaporated, and the classes became much more homogenized. In addition to this was also made worse with the fact that they had killed tier sets. Rating's holy grail since its launch, where each week you're waiting for that next drop to get that next set bonus for an effect that actually felt fun. However, because Azerite armor used these slots, tier sets were nowhere to be.
Someone in the chat said, I spent BFA grinding for the auction house mount because it would never be available again in the game ever. ... Yup.
Be found. Once again, the developers claimed that players would get their customization from the Azerite armor itself. And beyond that, another side effect was that it suffered aesthetically. The tier sets looked awesome, and again, adding to the class identity.
Bro, people always give me a hard time about this, and then time passes, and then I'm just proven right by comments that just pop up like this, right? Like, man, I really liked Mop Remix, but ever since I got all the rare mounts from Mop Remix, all of them, like, I just feel like no desire to log in anymore because all I would do is farm mounts. And I'm like, yeah. It turns out if you give everything to everyone and no one has anything to strive for anymore, you don't have a reason to log in and play anymore because you don't have that cool, unique thing that you're going for anymore. Yes. And people are so happy when they get free stuff, which kind of makes sense because it's like, hey, you want this for free? It's like, yeah, sure, why not? It's free. It's like you get happy, but like you shouldn't get happy when you're getting free stuff in something like this, because then it just devalues things that were valuable previously. And everyone always gives me a hard time for this take, and I still, to this day, don't understand why. I am dying to hear an argument from the other side to make me change my position. I've been dying for someone to speak logically to me about why I'm wrong. I know Max, I think, disagrees with me, and I would love to get onto his podcast and like just have him explain to me why I'm wrong here. But yeah, with something like the Magic Rooster, I personally spent hundreds of hours farming gold to get a Magic Rooster because I knew it was a trading card game and I knew it wasn't coming back. So I wanted to spend hundreds of hours or tens of hours farming gold to buy something that was rare, unique, valuable, exciting. And now they're giving TCG for free to Twitch drops. You know, people spent time in BFA to get something that was unique and rare and valuable, and then they make it so you can purchase the same thing but better for real life money, right? It still just doesn't add up to me, man. You know, it just doesn't. It just doesn't. Anyway, I know people will hate me for that one, but there we go.
It's nice to look like a mage when you're doing mage things, but instead of these class-themed sets, they had raid-themed sets, which would be cloth, leather, mail, and plate that matched the aesthetics of the raid rather than the class. And an unfortunate thing is that they were shared between all of the classes, such as Monk, Rogue, and Demon Hunter. They all used the same leather set, which ended up being a surprisingly big blow to the already weak class identity that they had. But all this is to say, the Azerite system failed, and it failed hard. It fell far short of replacing the void left behind at the end of Legion, and the classes felt really bland and disjointed from the very start to the very end. They did tweak it throughout the expansion. 8.1 added a class trait ring to solve this issue of a lack of identity. They also cut some of the more boring traits, and in 8.2, you would be able to get abilities on a necklace, which were also shared between classes, which was also an improvement, but still, one system can't replace artifacts, tier sets, legendaries, and more. It was certainly an uphill battle, and it started on the wrong hill. But Azerite armor wasn't their only feature. If war fronts and island expeditions were really good, maybe they could pick up the slack. Arguably the next largest were war fronts, which were advertised to be an RTS player's wet dream, where you would gather resources, build troops, and storm the keep, giving similar vibes to
I completely forgot about
RTS
Warfronts, bro.
time. And the gameplay itself was fine. Everything functioned as it should have, and they cycled through different stages that were progressed by donating resources to the war effort, which randomly granted good rewards once per cycle, and lesser rewards as much as the...
I don't think I ever did a Warfront. I feel like I never did this. I played all of BFA, but I feel like, did you guys ever do this? Maybe I did one while I leveled. I don't remember ever even doing this, man.
Players wanted to run them. It was an interesting cooperative experience, but they suffered one major flaw that brought it all down and made them into one of the biggest chores of the expansion. You couldn't lose. And at this point, I have to ask you a question. What is the point of any game? Chess, Mario, tic-tac-toe, a foot race, no matter how old or how new or how simple it is or how complex, they fall under this basic premise. You are offered obstacles and also rewarding solutions to overcome those obstacles. And while the solutions may vary, the satisfaction that you get from them is derived from some sort of challenge or threat of failure. Beating a level in Mario is satisfying because you successfully jumped all of the pits and stomped all of the Goombas, and winning a round in chess feels good because you won a battle of wits against your opponent and you captured their king. These games exist because they are competitive to some degree, whether they be against an AI or another player, and therefore they have some sort of rewarding characteristic to them. But the issue with Warfronts was that they were near impossible to lose. If a team performed poorly, the punishment wasn't a loss, it was just a slower win, and in fact, in a sad way, losing a match was more of an achievement than winning.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Okay, that's good. Oh my gosh. He's like, it's impossible to lose, and then he comes out with this screenshot.
With the only known recorded loss being from the streamer Asmongold and his viewers, who had to sit idle in their base the entire game to force a loss.
Wow.
Oh, they actually
achieved the impossible.
Oh, okay, no, I'm sorry, Asmon. They actually tried to lose. Okay, I thought they actually lost. I'm like, wow, that's impressive. But no, they sat AFK. My bad. I rescind that.
We thought that there would be no way that you could actually lose a Warfront. And today, we have proven people wrong.
Quite possibly the only Warfront group to see the defeat screen. A game without any danger of failure simply isn't a game. At that point, it turns into a chore. And that's what Warfronts felt like. In patch 8.2, they finally added the ability to lose with its heroic mode, but similarly to the Azerite armor, this came several months after release where many players had already quit. And the last of these major features were island expeditions. As described, these were dynamic treasure hunts where players would enter randomized islands with randomized environments and randomized loot. The goal was to obtain a certain amount of Azerite before an enemy team of players or advanced AI could do the same. And the main issue with them is the thing that they were banking on, which was this unique experience each time, wasn't really true, because the entire objective was this mad scramble for Azerite. You could never really stop to look around or notice any of the changes, and there really wasn't that much of a difference between the maps, which was a problem that was made by the randomness itself. Let me explain. Some of the islands did have set enemies here and there, but a lot of them, such as the rare mobs or the invasion events that would occur, are from a larger pool that are selected randomly. So if 90% of the content on the expeditions are random at base, what's the real difference between the maps? If there's no unique element to them to begin with, there really isn't anything to distinguish them from one another. It's all just topography and scenery. Like, here's a hill here instead of there, or maybe this rune is in that location, and all of the maps were just slightly different variations.
It's really hard as a developer to promise dynamic replayability. That's like a pretty big promise. And there are games that can do it. And the first one that comes to mind is like games where you drop in, what's like Fortnite called, where you drop in and you get different items, like a plunder storm. What's that genre called? PUBG. Yeah, what's that genre called? A battle royale. The reason a battle royale has dynamic replayability by definition is because every game you're going to get different stuff and you have to figure out how to play. But even those games, there becomes a best build, a best meta, and then you drop in, you don't get it, and then eventually you get it, and then by late game you have the best build. So then even those games that are by definition the most dynamic are still less dynamic than you might think. But then in a game where you can pick all your own stuff, it becomes very, very difficult to do that in modern gaming culture because everyone's going to game it. It becomes a game to try to min-max the fun out of it instantly, right? So it's just a hard promise to make, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Of tropical islands, leaving little variety in the actual setting. It would be similar if every dungeon in the game, instead of having these set mobs and set bosses, they all just had a random assortment as a baseline. Mixing them up the next time you ran them doesn't really offer a meaningful, unique experience. There's nothing to make a player get excited for getting a freehold key, or perhaps a Shrine of the Storm, because they're essentially the same aside from layout, except instead of the unique layout that these dungeons have, they would just all be tropical islands. The reward structure was also pretty poor. You either got some cosmetic piece of gear, sometimes a pet, and sometimes nothing. Just some Azerite, which you could get from basically any other activity in the game. They did eventually add a vendor so that players could target some rewards, which did add some structure to them, and it gave players long-term goals to work towards instead of just rolling the dice every turn. But again, much like the Azerite armor in Warfronts, it was added several months after the game's initial release, once more going down the same old line of releasing these features in a broken state and then fixing them several months later after the bulk of the player base had already quit.
Yeah, that happens
all
like
of its
every
major
expansion.
features flopping. The game at this point also started to suffer heavily from daily and weekly fatigue. Here's a list I made a few years ago of the massive amount of daily and weekly activities that were released over the course of the expansion. This is mobile game design at its worst, just releasing system after system, not to keep the player happy and wanting to log in, but instead to punish them for failing to log in and to do their daily chores. And that's what they felt like.
I'm such a big fan of like that Bruce Lee philosophy of adding through subtraction. What can I remove that's bloat that's going to add value? What can I get rid of to make the product better? And that doesn't mean getting rid of things that are necessary and getting rid of things that are great. That means the opposite, getting rid of things that are that don't need to be there to make a more simplistic and intuitive gaming experience, right? And I feel like WoW is quite the opposite, right? Every expansion, it's how much can we add, and it's like, there's just so much. I think this was a good screen cap a second ago, where it's just like, what could we prune down? What could we tailor and provide a better experience towards these certain things? A really good book that I read that outlined this concept well, it's been a couple of years now. Essentialism by Greg McKeown, I think is the book. And that book outlined how if you have too many things to focus on, your focus is spread between all of these things and you can't do any of them very well. But if you focus your attention on one or a few things, you can do that one or a few things much better, right? That was the general concept. But anyway, I think the same is very true in a game like WoW. Like you don't want something overly complex, especially for the new player experience, right?
At least the player happy and wanting to log in, but instead to punish them for failing to log in and to do their daily chores. And that's what they felt like chores. Anybody who played BFA may remember that is what everyone referred to them at this point. All of these either gave some form of gear or Azerite. So you had this environment created where you would log in and you have 40 different things to do all on a timer. And after you do all of that, then you can actually get to the fun part, or what little fun part there actually was. And that's what the expansion felt like. It felt like you were set on this unending treadmill of daily and weekly busy work to keep up with. And so the main draw of the expansion was to get you into this gerbil-like routine, pulling 300 slot machine handles that reset daily. And this is what they relied on to keep their engagement metrics up. It didn't really feel rewarding to play. It felt punishing to not play. And to many, it stopped feeling like a game and more like an obligation. Thankfully, they would move away from this in future expansions, but during BFA, this is where many would say that the daily and weekly grind was at its absolute worst. And so, the expansion just felt short in so many ways.
So I started this video saying I liked BFA, and I'm curious what people have to say so negatively about it, because I remember it generally being a positive experience for the things that I listed at the start of the video. That's a fair criticism, I'd say, is that it felt like a chore to keep your character up to date to actually need to play. I think I actually did have like 3 mages in BFA, or maybe two or 3 and alts, but I was playing like 7 days a week, like around the clock. And I do remember it was like, okay, this character has to do this character has to do this. So I think that's a fair criticism.
The classes felt dull and homogenized, having lost their identity from Legion. The Azerite armor was not nearly enough to fill the gaps that they had lost through the borrowed power systems that they'd lost at the end of Legion, so they all just felt incomplete. Warfronts were the antithesis of what a game should be due to their inability to lose them, and the Island Expedition's draw of a dynamic experience failed due to there being nothing to distinguish them from each other to begin with. All of this stuff received band-aid fixes several months later, after the majority of the player base quit, while the remaining few were encouraged to log in not through a fun and rewarding experience, but instead by the threat of falling behind by way of skipping the game's various 400 daily and weekly chores it set you on. The expansion itself ended with a climax with the defeat of an old god, N'Zoth, who had been built up in the lore for decades. The ending of an expansion is always a pretty big event, and players at this point were always treated with a long cutscene where you had major lore characters interacting with each other to put a nice bow on things, to celebrate the end of an expansion, and to also set the stage for the next adventure. For the Battle for Azeroth, however, players were treated with the very same footage you just watched as I droned over it in a monotone manner. That's it. 20 seconds, no dialogue. People were pissed, and Blizzard was absolutely blasted for this. They had to unlist the video on their YouTube page due to its negative response, and it goes down today as the laziest and most fitting end to one of the worst expansions they had ever produced.
Wow. I forgot about that, but I think I remember people being mad about it.
Like with most things, it wasn't all bad. Similar to Draenor's story, the raids, as usual, were amazing. Mythic Plus was still fresh at this point.
Yeah, Mythic Plus was fun. I remember.
They also had a redone PvP system with War Mode, where you would toggle it on and off, with some incentive to have it on for higher rewards. This worked really well with the theme of the expansion, and it sort of reignited world PvP in a lot of areas of the world. The only issue with that being faction imbalance, and there were some technical issues such as server lag at the time. But at the end of the day, I would say that BFA suffered a lot of the same issues of Draenor, in the sense that the bare bones of the expansion were there, but all of its supporting features just didn't pan out in the way that they had hoped. It was certainly a dark time within the game's history for many, but not all was lost. After all, there's another expansion on the way, and it can't possibly get any worse. Right? So that's why today many consider the battle for Azeroth
can always
to be a
get
bad
worse.
expansion. As usual, no hate if you enjoyed it personally. This video isn't meant to take away from that experience. I just wanted to put it out there because it does get a lot of hate these days, and I would rather people know why instead of just using it as a punching bag for the fun of it. I think the lessons to be learned here are many, perhaps the most major of which being the downsides of borrowed power, which they have now shied away from recent expansions. The lesson is that while they may be great in one expansion, losing them in the next may leave players feeling like their favorite classes are incomplete.
Yeah,
you're already losing all
fair.
of your gear and tier sets when you're moving into another expansion, so it's always a good idea to keep the regression to a minimum. And in this way, it's hard to say if this was truly a fault of BFA as much as it was Legion's. Perhaps the blame should be shared between the two. Another
That's
obvious
fair.
lesson is to test your features more thoroughly before releasing them. All three of these features, the armor, warfronts, and expeditions, all received updates that improved them greatly. And I would honestly wager to say that if they had all released in these states, the expansion today would actually be looked back upon as being pretty decent. But they simply didn't. All of the feedback that I shared in this video was relayed to them during the beta, but they released them anyways to meet deadlines, and this was just another reminder for the player base that this was no longer the developer that they had fallen in love with, as the Blizzard of old would straight up cancel games if they felt like they weren't up to their quality standards. And finally, it teaches the lesson not to over-rely on daily and weekly timers to keep the players coming back. While they may be effective in MAU numbers, at a certain point it becomes excessive and it starts to feel like a mobile game more than an MMO, where you take care of various chores before you can actually do what you logged in to do. It's like the gaming equivalent of eating your spinach before you can move on to dessert. I'm all for a healthy diet, but this is a video game. They're supposed to be fun. If the players are obligated to play them for
I feel like this is one of the key examples when you're too dialed in to just the metrics, but you don't have any skin in the game, and you don't have your feet on the ground and you're actually playing the game. If you're just looking at things analytically, it's like, hey, look, we put in things that are keeping players logging in. That's good. And it's like, wait, but are you a player actually logging in? Because if you are, you can tell that it's not good, even though the metrics are saying that it is good. And you have plenty of examples of this, right? Plenty of examples, especially more in like modern gaming culture. I read a book by Nassim Taleb recently called Skin in the Game, and that was the general premise, where there's asymmetries that are really easy to miss when you don't have skin in the game, when you aren't that person doing that thing and you're just kind of outside of the system looking in and dialed in on the numbers. You're gonna miss these blatant, obvious facts that anyone who actually plays and understands or is doing that thing would understand. And there's just this huge asymmetry, and that was that book. That was a good book.
for anything other than relaxation and enjoyment, it's a bad sign for its health. But the real question is, did Blizzard learn from all of this? Well, we will most certainly find out on the next episode of Why It Was. Thanks for watching my video.
There we go.
We will continue on with this series with other
Matt
expansions and other MMOs and games, so stay tuned, and I'll see you then. Like the video if you liked it, because I'll see you in the next one.
Let's
Peace.
go, baby. Dude, we're on a roll with the Mad Season uploads right now, man. Another absolute banger. Once again, I appreciate how the video is not overly negative. I appreciate the constructive criticism, the analytics behind it. This is why BFA was bad, not just complaining to complain, but these are the things that people liked and didn't like, and this is what we can learn from it to move on, right? I love the positivity, the constructive part of it, not just complaining. And I do think we see this general trend with World of Warcraft expansions, where the end of the expansion, everyone's dooming, saying this sucks, it can't be any worse, the new expansion is gonna save us all. And then the new expansion comes out, and then for the first like week, you can't be negative. For the first week, everyone's like, you can't say this new expansion sucks. Case in point, Quinn69 tried to do that with Warthin, and he got completely hammered. But then maybe he turned out to be right, which is interesting. But anyway, the first week or two, you can't complain because you're gonna get chewed out by everyone else, because this is our savior. This saved the game because last expansion was bad and this expansion's great. And then you see 2 to 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks go by and everyone's just kind of like pensive, and then a month or two and everyone's like quitting, saying this sucks. And then the whole expansion goes by and you have your ups and downs, and then by the end of it, it's like, please, new expansion, save us from this expansion sucking the most. It can't possibly get any worse than this. And then rinse and repeat 10 times. And that's what we've seen, right? It's the same cycle over and over and over. Which Quinn? The other Quinn. There it is, man. Why BFA was bad. Great video. Great upload. That's what we're talking about.